Hello and welcome. Today on the sofa we have Rachel, who's running for president. Rachel, please tell us a bit about yourself and why you are running.
Like I said, my name's Rachel. I have been president of the Students' Union since July, and to be honest, it's been the best job ever. It's been a job I've loved. It's been a job that I've wanted to wake up and come into work every morning, and it's a job where I feel like I can actually make change, which is something that I don't think I can experience anywhere else. And I'm rerunning because I want to experience that for another year. There's a lot of things that I want to do this year that I couldn't have done in 8 months, and I think that 18 months is enough time for me to actually make positive change for the union.
Okay, so this year, what has been your motivation to rerun for it? Is it the same as the motivation you had last year, or is there something different?
Well, last year, when I was sort of looking through the roles, I chose to run for president because I thought it was the one that best fit my skill set, and it's the one that I was most passionate about. This year, I want to rerun because I think there's a lot more to do. Okay. I think that while a lot can be achieved in a year, I don't think that it should stop at a year. We've never had a second-term president,
right,
in terms of someone running for 2 years as president, and I'd like to change that, and I think that a lot can be done with another year. Okay,
well, coming on to that, I mean, who do you think is your toughest competitor this year?
Ron, 100%.
Ron?
Yes.
Right, okay. Tell us a bit about your success stories from last year. What went well?
Okay, so I think the things that went well, we've still maintained a positive relationship with the university. That's something that Leicester's actually been really proud of doing, and I think it's something that myself and the rest of the officer team are going to continue with, and hopefully if I get re-elected we continue that for another year. One of the biggest things from my end is around the things we've done with the catering services across campus. So previously the union had no influence over any of the catering services outside this building, so that includes things like Delicious and the Library Cafe, whereas now we've been able to work with them to do things like introduce a Halls Eat Anywhere card, make sure that students living in catered halls get a better deal, and that's going to be introduced as of 2016. That's something that students have been wanting for a long time. Now, when I was in catered halls, that's something that I wanted, and now I'm very excited that I can actually introduce that.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so just going back a bit to your toughest competitor, why do you think other people this year are not running for the position?
Yeah, this is something I've been asked quite a lot, actually.
Right.
I think that part of it is running against an incumbent can be quite nerve-wracking, especially for a first time.
Yeah.
Obviously, I didn't announce I was running until Monday, so I'm not really sure what happened on that level. I think that maybe people identified more with the other roles. The role of president is quite a non-portfolio role, and I think that given the short time period for nominations, maybe students felt like they could identify more with education or well-being or sport because it was very specific things that you could do for those. And I also think that maybe there's a bit of like an issue with confidence in leadership. I know that societies this year have struggled to try and get people to run for president specifically, whereas the other roles tend to be a lot easier to fill.
Yeah.
So on my manifesto, I put running leadership workshops specifically for underrepresented groups, but I think for all students to make sure that they actually have the confidence to run for roles like president in the Students' Union.
Right, so what would you have to say to stop some students maybe saying that there's not enough power actually involved being president?
That's a very interesting question.
It is.
I wouldn't say the president has any more power than any of the other roles. I think from a university perspective, maybe they see the president as the figurehead for the union. And I think that in the job description things it says figurehead of the Students' Union.
Right.
Which is fine, but I think that...
So are you saying it's just a title then?
I wouldn't say it's just a title. I think the things like chairing the trustee board of the fourth biggest charity in Leicestershire is quite a big deal, and I think that the role of president has developed in a way that a lot can be done with it. Right. I think it's just that it's just what you choose to do with it, because you could choose to not do anything with, say, the sports role and sit back and not be a sports leader for a year, and at the same time someone could be president and sit back and not do anything presidential, quote unquote, for the year. So I think it comes entirely down to the person about how they choose to use that role and make themselves a leader. Okay, so you briefly just mentioned about your leadership workshop. You've promised this in your manifesto about the workshop for underrepresented groups. Yeah.
Would this include one for men, because only 49% of students are male, 6 out of the 19 candidates are just men, and out of the 5 officers, only 1 of them are male?
Yeah, I mean, like, traditionally, women have been very underrepresented in the Students' Union. Last year it was an all-male sub team, so this is the first year we've actually had 4 out of 5 of the exec to be women.
Okay.
I think that personally, the way I see it is that BME students, so black and minority ethnic students, are vastly underrepresented in every level of leadership in the Students' Union.
Right.
And I think personally that's sort of the group I'd prefer to target rather than specifically men.
Okay, so what if men are underrepresented again this year? Then would it not concern up as an issue that needs to be resolved?
I think men have dominated for the last 20 to 30 years, so I don't see why that 2 years with more women is an issue.
But then would it not be fair to say that maybe make it 50-50 rather than have one outpower the other?
What do you mean by outpower? What do you think specifically about women outpowers men?
No, not in terms of that. In terms of having more female representatives. So instead of having one group having more positions, put it on a balance.
I disagree with that. I think that if it's an open democracy, we shouldn't have quotas for full-time officers.
Right. Okay. That's fair. That's fair. So something that I don't know if you're aware of this. Last year, for the media groups, their offices were moved to a place where it was not accessible by wheelchair users.
Yeah.
So our media office is now on the second floor of this building, which cannot be accessed by disabled people. Were you aware of this when you were in power as president?
I wasn't aware of the fact of where it was moving.
Okay.
I knew that the offices were moving because I knew there was changes happening to the corridor.
Okay.
I wasn't informed about where it was going. I still think that there's no perfect place for media groups to be. I'd like to see them given a space that is accessible, and I think the best way to do that is by making the entire building accessible.
Right.
I had this discussion earlier with some students, and ideally long term I'd like to see a lift on the other side of the building. I think that's sort of the basic level that we should be offering.
Yeah.
But I do think media groups should be in a more visible place. I'm not sure where that is, and I'm not sure which space that would be.
Yeah.
But perhaps at some point it could be something we look into when we're looking at reviewing the building. Yeah,
definitely. Because I mean, me personally, because I'm a person with cerebral palsy, so being a presenter on this channel, having to get up to the Lust office it's quite a struggle.
Sure.
With the disability. So, do you know why it was moved from its original place to going to the top?
I honestly can't say. I'm not sure of the answer to
that. Moving on, why do you think housing fairs are necessary when people can just do their research online?
I think it's good to have one central place to go for this sort of thing. I think there's a lot more issues surrounding housing than just where to get your house.
Okay.
So obviously we've got a lot of estate agents, not just in Queen's Road, on Evington Road and in town as well. But I think that in my eyes, a housing fair would include things like where you can get accessible housing, or things like private halls, because they aren't particularly communicated to students as well as possible, or options for currently staying in the current halls. Advertising our own estate agents, SU Lets, things like housing checklists to make sure you've got a good quality house, and then we can have students helping or volunteering going around and ensuring that students know what they're looking for when looking for a house, rather than just seeing what's on the internet, where they offer the best looking properties. Right,
so are you saying that students are incapable of doing their own research online? Because if a student wanted to get the information, surely they could just ring up any letting agency and ask them about what's occurring.
I think you could get the information, but whether it's honest information is probably another issue.
So why do you think landlords are going to be more honest on this fair than on the phone?
I think we'd have people around to advise. I think we should have housing advisors and that sort of thing. Pro Bono currently do a check of the contracts, and I think that having all those services in one place would be very useful.
Something else you want to introduce is a loyalty card. Doesn't the LE card already cover this?
It doesn't cover the union building.
Okay.
And I think that the LE card doesn't actually give the best deal for students. The way I see it, Loughborough at the moment have a very good loyalty card system, whereas you get a certain amount of points, so I think it's about 1,000 points a month or something, you get 10% off your purchases, and that sort of thing. I want to have one that works across every outlet across campus, not just in the library cafe and Delicious.
So how do you plan on bringing more better deals than the LE card that already is there?
So as I was talking about with the commercial services and the change to the catering services, it means the union actually has influence over these things, whereas before they didn't have any influence. So it means that we can actually work in the best interest of students, which I don't think the university was doing. I think they're working in the best deal for staff, and I think that being part of this new... Being part of this new... So part of this new initiative
Right.
means that students can actually have a say in what they want to see from these deals. And I think that's something that's been lacking with the LE card.
All right, that's fair. You talk about students' campaign pot. How are you going to go about monitoring this, and what are its limits?
Okay, so currently the union exec get a certain amount of money to fund campaigns every year. I haven't thought about the exact amount, but for example, there's been a lot of campaigns run by students that some people have not been able to fund. So the Environmental Action Society at the moment are running a divestment campaign, and they've had to crowdfund to get money for that because there's no place in the union that can provide them with that money.
Okay.
So that's what I see the campaigns pot being used for, is for things that student groups and students want to do in terms of activism and changing things, but they might not have the funds to do.
Okay. So going a bit back to last year, I was reading your manifesto earlier, and this is some of the stuff that you say you've done as president.
Yeah.
So it says here, introduce a train ticket machine in the SU. Is that actually here?
It's coming in April, 10 weeks yesterday.
It's coming in April. So why is it stated as something that you've done already?
I think it was a grammatical error.
Okay. So are we claiming that the stuff on here is not actually already done?
Well, it's happening. So, for example, the
happening.
Halsey Anywhere card, that's happening as of the 2016-17 academic year.
Okay.
Because I couldn't have done it in 3 months over the summer.
Right. Okay. No, that's fair. Something else you mentioned about supporting international students.
Yeah.
Is it fair to say that just meeting them at Heathrow wouldn't really be considered as support?
I think it's the beginning of support. We've never done that before as a sabbatical team.
Okay.
Sabbatical officers have never gone down to Heathrow to welcome new students.
Right.
And this is the first year it happened. So that's a definite start. I also had a lot of input into International Welcome Week, which I worked with the international officer to do, and I've also supported her in introducing or setting up the ISA to make sure that it's working for new students.
Okay. So, how do you plan on going to take that forward from last year and support them in a different way?
I think that we need to listen to international students, because I think, for example, with International Welcome Week, obviously there was a lot of input, but I don't necessarily think I should have been the person to input that. Being a new president means that a lot of students weren't around over the summer, so it was very difficult to sort of gather opinion. But I think that if I get elected as a second term, even if I don't, something I want to start doing as a third semester is gathering ideas about what students actually want from International Welcome Week and what support, what talks, what they want to see.
Okay,
because I don't think they've been taken into consideration before.
Okay, so something that you want to work towards is a better student housing. Do you want to elaborate on that? Is that in terms of prices, in terms of living styles in the housing? What do you mean by a better student housing?
I think I'm particularly referring to private rented accommodation.
Okay.
I think the pricing isn't necessarily an issue. We're one of the cheapest cities to live in for to be a student.
Really? I mean, some students would quite beg to differ on that. They especially the student wellbeing officers.
Yeah.
They're trying to focus on making the houses a bit cheaper because they feel it's not actually as cheap as it should be.
Yeah, so I'm paying for example, I'm paying £68 a week, whereas my friends in Brighton are paying £120 a week for private rented accommodation.
Okay,
so I think that comparatively, Leicester student housing in the private sector is a lot cheaper than a lot of student cities.
Okay.
I don't necessarily think it's I don't necessarily think they're value for money though, and I think that's an issue. I think that students are signing for houses, myself included, a lot of the time, which aren't the quality that I'd expect from a house.
Okay.
I think that when students are moving into houses with mould, infested with mice and cockroaches, which is a story that happens all too often, the union shouldn't be standing for that.
Right.
I think that we should be campaigning for better quality student housing as well as at a good price.
So do you actually feel like being a president, you will actually have a voice to input within these houses? Because surely that's majorly down to the landlords and the letting companies.
I think students have a powerful influence over the local council.
Okay.
We can work with the Montfort Students' Union and Leicester College to create a collective voice for students in the local area. One of my manifesto points is to set up a student community board. This happens a lot in other countries actually. So for example in Sweden they have a student community board where they discuss things like housing and student safety, and then they support the council in lobbying landlords, for example, to provide better quality accommodation.
Okay. Before we end this off, we're going to play a quick game.
Oh god.
Right, so this is a word association game.
Okay.
I'm going to fire some words at you, and the first word that comes into your mind, just shout it out. Okay, you got to be quick. You ready?
I can be.
Okay, so here's the first word. Union.
Students.
President.
Me.
Students.
Union.
Inspiration. Oh, we've got to be quick. You got to be quick. Inspiration.
As in like a person.
Anything. Inspiration. First word that comes into your head.
Winner.
Rachel.
Holland.
Last.
TV.
Goal.
Jamie Vardy.
Change.
Union.
Leicester.
City.
Thank you so much, Rachel. Good luck for the elections.
Thank you.